are going to kick off the rest of the afternoon here by talking about commodity versus custom. And this is going to center a lot around the Copilot M365 type of capabilities, but also talking about the sort of broader context of building, integrating, taking advantage of what's coming down the pipeline from SaaS companies and so on, and how that relates into the things that you might build that sit alongside that or are used in conjunction with each of those use cases. So you already know me, but you don't know my, you don't think like everybody at Concurrency is super tall.
Strategic hires are the last one.
That's right. But introduce yourself, please.
Chris Blackburn, I'm the solutions architect here on our modern workplace team. So pretty much anything Microsoft 365 I work with the rest of our delivery team as well as our sales team to not only educate customers, work through conversations and understand their needs, but also help prescribe the right tools in that M365 stack for them to implement ahead of things like Copilot, how to get ready for things like Copilot in their environment. Been here for 8 years, about a third years, your tenure here, and I've been doing Microsoft consulting for over 20 years now.
Awesome. Thanks, Chris. So Chris is going to run the majority of this session. I'm going to kind of kick it off by talking about a little bit of relationship between these two sort of synergistic angles of looking at AI projects, and we'll get you done by about 2:30-ish on our track. Okay. So there's really two like significant boxes that your AI initiatives might fit in. And I suppose you could delineate this into like sub boxes, but this is the way to kind of think about it. There's commodity, and then there's mission centric, or you might call it custom. But I think mission centric is like a better way to think about it in the broader context. So commodity, what I like to think about with commodity is like spell check. We've all gotten super used to spell check. And if all of a sudden spell check stops working, all the words that I always spell wrong, but I just sort of rely on spell check to fix for me as I'm writing the sentence, start becoming spelt wrong in the context of what I'm writing. So it becomes something I don't even think about that becomes immensely useful to my productivity. If I didn't have spell check, your perspective of the documents I've written or what I ultimately deliver to you will get taken down a notch because you'll notice I can't spell actually or probably or things like this that are kind of often misspelled, right? Or my grammar might not be as appropriate because I use a semicolon instead of a colon in a certain situation. And commodity is really just this way about like lifting up the general productivity of everyone who's participating in this like space that we're in. And when we think about where AI takes the commodity capabilities, it's even further than like just what the generic kind of spell check or word prediction that we have in Outlook is today. It's this idea of how can I accelerate reuse without even thinking about reuse? Like, why am I so quick to produce PowerPoints? Well, it's because I've produced PowerPoints for all these scenarios before, and I can pull all the things I know and create a PowerPoint really fast because I just know where I've stored all those assets, right? I've done a statement of work on this type before. I've done this kind of project. I know where that old asset was, so I can pull that slide over and be like, this is the perfect slide for this situation. AI has the ability to do that in an immensely more capable way because it has the index of all the data that exists within but choose your environment, sales environment, or my productivity environment, or my customer service environment. So on the left-hand side, what you can see are examples of tools that we might be using in a commodity space. GitHub Copilot, Windows 11 Copilot, Office 365 Copilot, Security Copilot, varieties of SaaS products you might be adopting that are centric to your industry. You will see AI popping up as a commodity component of all of those tools that you're adopting on a regular basis. And then the right-hand side is everything that we talked about this morning, which is where AI brings a competitive advantage to your ability to execute within your organization. And not that commodity is a competitive advantage, it's more like table stakes, right? It's more like if I'm writing documents and I'm not using this and my competitor is, they're simply going to be faster at doing it than what like I can possibly be. On the right-hand side, it's like It's this direct alignment to a job to be done that's tied to the mission of my business. I think about the mission of my business. I think of what jobs to be done my mission enables, whatever those things are, whether I'm a manufacturer or I'm a knowledge broker or whatever I do. This is where competitive advantage is driven by accuracy, ROI, sponsorship, data, enabling the creation of AI capabilities that make my company more effective in what it does directly, very specifically to its organizational capabilities. So if we were going to talk about examples between these two things, let's talk about commodity first. So summarize, code, and improve. This is my GitHub scenario, right? This is, I've written something, now tell me how I can make it better. It can maybe refactor my code or might update my code or address it in a different way. Help me write an email. I need to write an email to someone that I'm not sure how to say it. It's a complicated question. It's something I'm not sure how to do it with the right empathy. Maybe I want a prompt to be able to do it better. Help me write an email. Summarize a meeting. That's going to be a great Copilot scenario of like, don't you always hate being the guy or gal who has to like be the note taker and like write all that down and send out the summary notes after the meeting? Like that job's like a thankless job. And a lot of times like it makes you less engaged in the meeting. Like I actually hate taking notes in meetings. Like I prefer to close my laptop, put it to the side, look the person in the eye, really focus on internalizing what is they're saying to me and ask good questions. And someone else takes the notes. And the person who's taking the notes tends to not be able to be as engaged because they're busy taking notes. What if I didn't have to take the notes? Something took it for me and then captured the action items that were developed out of the meeting. Commodity capability that we shouldn't necessarily need to do. Find content in Teams. I used to say SharePoint, but that's even worse. Like finding content in Teams is like one of my least favorite things to do.
They said it was like hierarchical, right? You go in like folders in Windows Explorer and find stuff. Now with Teams, it's just everywhere.
It's everywhere. So like that's an example. How can I make that experience faster? Analyze security logs. It's like a Sentinel scenario, right? Like how can I enable the team to find the right things in the security logs in my Azure environment? Or then optimize Azure spend. This hasn't come out yet, but there's a variety of blogs on it where there's a Copilot for Azure spend optimizer, which is even better than like Azure Advisor. Like this is super cool. So commodity is all about just like all of us need it. Let's enable it broadly across our organizations. Mission centric is the things we talked about this morning. Create a quote for a customer service chatbot, automate PO to order matching, a supply chain optimization project, healthcare Q&A, an RFQ filter. Like one of my companies I was talking with, they were all about like, how do I filter down a certain number of these quotes I get so I only focus on the important ones? These are things that commodity probably isn't going to do well for you. And when I've looked at it to try to do them, it just sort of works, but doesn't really get to level of accuracy or helpfulness where it actually achieves that goal. So SaaS products now might intermingle between the two of these. That it might be built for a very specific use case to accomplish a goal, and it might sort of be a SaaS platform that's driven toward a commodity of doing a mission-centric thing. But we're not entirely there yet. So that's the major divide between these two items. What we're going to talk about mostly in this session is how do I enable the commodity use cases broadly across my organization. So when you think about that cycle we've been talking about, like where do you get started? A lot of times deciding on AI being a thing, and it's important for us to do, starts here. The group envisioning sessions and deciding on your idea is where you might say, is this a commodity scenario that's going to be served by what we adopt in Copilot? Or is it going to be a scenario that's adopted by us building like concurrency GPT or Generac GPT that does certain things for my organization early on and enables other use cases later? So one of the things that's important to creating the strategy is mapping the core business strategy to those goals, aligning revenue and operational savings opportunities that are tied to it, and understanding the commodity uplift to general productivity isn't as easy to capture and articulate as that of the mission-centric. Like mission-centric is usually like very closely tied to a direct ROI. Whereas commodity uplift is more like general productivity competitiveness that is a little bit harder to measure. Like a lot of things you're going to see today, be like, wow, like in and of themselves, are kind of like, how do I measure that? Like, but then put together, you're like, wow, like that doesn't represent a pretty substantial difference to how we do work. And what does my life look like then versus now? Like, be like trying to measure everybody without spell check in the company. Like, that'd be an interesting measurement, right? Words per minute spelled wrong. So a lot of that comes into a little bit of a general bucket. And then select focus opportunities that are in mission-centric AI. Last thing I would call out before handing this over to Chris here is that these all work together. So like, you may choose to have a Generac GPT, Copilot, and a customer service chat all in the same environment, and they all point at each other to do different things that are focused to the organization's goals. And they're not duplicative in nature, as long as you understand the job that you're asking each to perform. And one of the really interesting things that we'll talk about is this idea of plugins, and that plugins can facilitate one of them talking to the other. That like a Copilot that does this like kind of generic job might point into a Generac GPT that might even point into a customer service bot or directly to a customer service bot to answer a certain question. And they all can play very relatedly to each other. This goes to that scaled model idea too, that like all these are part of the same ecosystem of helping our company to be able to be more effective. So with that, I'll let Chris knock on the rest.
And to extend that even more, in some cases, as they really do reference each other, it's which is the best tool for the job. So we could say, as we start to look at the OpenAI platform, it might be data within the business. It'd be a Bing Chat Enterprise where we're just looking at large language models to understand some sort of concept or look at some sort of data. And then as we start to talk about the Microsoft 365 Copilot at the heart, it's what data is in that platform that's going to really help drive efficiencies in the business. And as we start to really dig into where a lot of us have our data today, we have it in Teams channels, we have it in SharePoint sites, we have it in mailboxes, and we want to be able to produce some sort of answer to a question based on data that is already there. That's when we start to look at that first objective as the business outcome. What are we looking to get out of one of these chat GPT-like platforms? What are we looking to get out of Microsoft 365 Copilot, which is going to be more publicly available in about a month, but we'll talk about that a little bit. But as we start to think about some of the business scenarios, if that Microsoft 365 scenario is one that interests you, this is a great time to be thinking about where do you want that tool to provide business outcomes, because that is a tool that a lot of businesses are looking at as to what is the ROI for that. As you look at licenses, as you look at some of the requirements, as you're looking to integrate more into the business through things like connectors and plugins, and even into your existing data, how is that going to drive business efficiencies across your user base? And I mentioned the cost because as we start to look at each of these different SKUs, as Microsoft starts to present that concept of their Copilot over and above Azure, over and above Bing, there are specific requirements that you'll want to meet. There are specific costs that will come with those. Starting to look at Windows itself, that is generally going to be available. It's starting to roll out now. It's probably by the time Ignite rolls around in the next month, we'll start to see 23H2 become available to the general public. You'll be able to see your users engage in Windows Copilot, or may opt to disable that, because we're definitely seeing both scenarios, and be able to push in users to something like more of a Bing Chat Enterprise, where we want them to be able to reference those large language models, but do it in a protected manner, where we know that if they are searching for organization-specific, they're using organization-specific content and looking at it at broader context, we know that that's not going to feed into those large language models. So it provides more of a security and the commercial data protection. And then as we start to look at that Microsoft 365 Copilot, that commoditized version of AI built into every facet of those Microsoft tools that we use every day, like SharePoint and Teams, email, the web, all of those do require at least some understanding of how are we positioning our security, privacy, and compliance around our data? How are we ensuring that that data is protected? And as we're looking to present that, maybe some of that protection is just within your organization. Maybe you don't want certain content that you have within SharePoint to be widely available to everyone within your organization. So being mindful of your data protection policies is very important before you even turn a feature like this on. But then being able to leverage the Microsoft 365 chat, some of the plugins that Nathan mentioned, that is something capable that we can integrate into other tools to make it available inside of Teams, where we could look for a certain content or integrate with a, maybe you're using some third-party platform. One that is more common would be something like Azure. Maybe you're referencing that or using that in the context of Copilot. And that is something that you can integrate not only into your cloud-based experience, but then how are you integrating that experience into your Microsoft 365 apps as well. So don't know if anyone has seen kind of this diagram. You might have gone out onto the web, you've looked at, okay, what exactly is Microsoft 365 Copilot? There's been some discussion of the semantic index and how it takes a look at your data. There is the context of your applications, and then as well looking and referencing those large language models, which you can see on the right-hand side of the screen. This happens every single time that you're doing a search using the Microsoft 365 Copilot. It sends the response, and at the end of each session, it destroys the data. So that's part of that corporate data protection that is in the Bing Chat Enterprise today, that as you look to leverage your own semantic index, which will be something you'll be able to turn on in the upcoming months, is going to give you that capability to leverage those Chat GPT-like functionalities within your Microsoft 365 environment. So indexing is at the heart of the success of leveraging your data in Microsoft 365 in the context of Copilot itself. And so as you can see, if we were to break down a specific search with using the semantic index, it uses things like organization terms. So it's your custom dictionary of words that you use in your organization. It takes specific documents. Maybe this is a phrase that is used commonly across your documents. It's able to index that and recognize that is a very important excerpt. It could be a mission statement. And then looking at the semantic search itself, it's you interacting with your data in your organization, looking at data or documents that might live in your OneDrive, in a team site, in SharePoint. It's providing that index and as well looking at the context of that document if I'm doing a search, and then being able to come back and looking at different searches within your organization and being able to produce things like frequently asked questions. So if multiple people are performing that same search, it's able to learn from that, and it's able, based on that semantic index, to provide some of those results. So this is a high-level breakdown of what a result would look like using the semantic index, understanding what's in your environment and being able to provide more accurate results than you would a traditional SharePoint search today. So let's take a little bit. So raise of hands, is everyone familiar with Microsoft 365 Copilot? Does anyone have Microsoft 365 Copilot today? Fantastic. So you got two in the house. I'd love to talk to you afterwards, because there are some stringent requirements that we'll talk about in order to get access to that within your organizations today. So as we look at the different Copilots, you're going to hear it everywhere. There's a Copilot for Power BI. There's a Copilot for PowerPoint. There's in Windows. And we'll talk a little bit about some of the security aspects of it, how it's going to be coming to Intune to be able to look at your devices in the future. So AI is tying into everything in the Microsoft world, and being able to understand what it's capable of doing will help you be able to decide some of those business cases down the road. So as we look at Copilot itself, we can see that it's not only that cross-app capability, but also it integrates into the whole of your Microsoft suite. It'll integrate into Windows. It'll integrate into every facet of the Microsoft world, as I mentioned. But as we start to look at some of the use cases where Copilot may be value, it's Azure going through and using Whiteboard. Let's say you're doing some brainstorming. It has the capability to take some of that brainstorming, some of those notes, and be able to provide an interactive summary of what is captured, as well as being able to generate action items. I think that's probably going to be one of the biggest values of Copilot itself, as we look at all these different integrations into the Microsoft world of being able to take large amounts of data and provide quick and concise summaries. Well, I know here at Concurrency, some of us are starting to look at the Teams Premium plugin or Teams Premium license within Microsoft 365, and there will be some meeting summary values, which we'll look at in a second. But that'll be the biggest driver around adoption, I think, and some of the success of that is how it will help speed up your end users' day-to-day lives and how they work in each of these products. The Copilot for Outlook. This particular add-in is definitely one that does require that new version of Outlook. You might have seen that little toggle switch if you're using Outlook on your desktops today to be able to activate that new version. So to be able to look at some of your emails, be able to provide a summary. If you're interacting or exchanging emails with multiple individuals in a thread, it'll be able to provide you that summary of that interaction. So if you get looped into a conversation, you can quickly be able to get up to speed without going through, which I know I have to do sometimes, scrolling through multiple conversations and interactions within an email thread to understand what's actually happening when you get brought into an email thread. And it has the ability to not only track assignments, but also has that ability to attend a meeting for you. So that I have not seen in person, but I'm very curious to see how Outlook can respond to emails or be able to capture some of that apart from some of the Teams Premium integrations. So here's an example of where you would look at that Outlook integration and be able to see a meeting note and then be able to look at a particular action item for a summary within an email. And then on this next slide, kind of be able to see meeting summaries. So this is probably one of the coolest features that brings that current Teams experience, that meeting experience, and gives you that ability to, even if you missed a meeting, to have that ability to quickly catch up by looking at a meeting recap to understand what interaction went on, if there are specific tasks that might be assigned to you, and not have to go back through and watch a meeting in its entirety, or even go back and read through a transcript of a meeting, which I've done several times, and it's not a fun exercise. So, being able to have those summaries definitely provide some value. And then being able to do things like jumpstart documents. So let's say that your team is working on a number of documents. You know that there have been notes taken in a OneNote. There are other things like a contract, etc. You can go through and just using natural language, say, draft up a particular proposal for a customer based on a particular document, and then it will go through and help you create that foundation of the document without having to start it from scratch. In a lot of organizations, they have templates, and so being able to take a template and taking notes from a meeting will be able to help jumpstart some of that interaction as well. And one of my favorite that I'm really excited about is on the go. So being able to use natural language, be able to have my phone, use voice to text, integrate Copilot, have it be able to go through and actually create a draft of an email or even a document on the go. Definitely is a time saver, because I know I've gone through and I've had to type up emails from scratch sometimes, and being able to use Copilot to help jumpstart some of that capability while on the go will definitely be an immense time saver. So throughout each of these scenarios, I think the biggest theme is being able to take data, be able to take conversations, documents, and quickly streamline those and provide you that knowledge of what's going on in a conversation, be able to help jumpstart interactions with customers, and be able to really allow you to then take that next step of productivity without having to really start from scratch within each interaction. And to take the interaction of that Microsoft 365 platform and really start to look at other facets of the business where there may be integrations. Microsoft has a number of their graph connectors that allow you to integrate Microsoft 365 with a plethora of platforms, and it just continues to grow, where you can then, let's say, integrate a booking platform. A lot of us are familiar with a number of different booking platforms that will allow us to go through and make reservations. In this scenario, this Citric Easy is one that is used in the scenario where we have a fellow coworker that has booked a flight, and now I also want to be able to, I've been asked to travel along with them. And so in this scenario, as we can see, we can ask Copilot to help us book this flight. And at the end, we can see that it will allow us to just click that book button without having to send an email or a Teams chat to that coworker, ask them for their itinerary. It's able to use the graph, pull that information, look for that same flight, and then give us that capability to book it as well. So all this was done just within the Microsoft 365 platform. Makes it easy for us to perform some of those tasks that may not necessarily be centric to word processing or creating documents or presentations, but helps to save business productivity within that M365 space. So as we look at Copilot, as we look at some of the AI-driven capabilities, even outside of that Microsoft 365 stack, there are a number that currently exist today that we can take a look at as well. So Bing Chat Enterprise, it is that protected version of ChatGPT without creating your own internal GPT instance. It allows you to leverage the large language models, and it keeps those searches private to your organization. So if I am going to bing.com/chat and I am already a Microsoft 365 customer and it's turned on within my environment, I will then be able to see that I have a protected session and then can start searching. I can go back and reference those searches. I can save them in different categories. And I know and have that peace of mind that it's not contributing any of the data that I look for to the large language models. I also have that ability to look at meeting information, as we kind of took a look at before in some of the meeting summaries. This is going to be a huge time saver with the Teams premium capabilities. So that intelligent recap at its heart is one of the biggest capabilities to that specific license. And one thing to note is to really take advantage of the intelligent recaps. You must have recording and transcription turned on for all of your meetings. So it can take the transcription, it can take the meeting itself and be able to produce that intelligent recap. So that's one of the biggest benefits of the Teams Premium. It gives additional meeting options. When you go into Outlook and you click meeting options, you can do things like watermarks, managing some of the access to who can record and have access to some of the data, allows you to do virtual appointments, gives you an improved webinar experience. So if you're using a third-party webinar platform, this license will allow you to be able to take advantage and potentially have a cost savings over some of those third parties. And one of the big things that I'm really excited about as a streamer myself is the ability to take external coders and take external sound, take external cameras, and be able to produce a meeting with a live streaming input. So instead of having to leverage just a laptop and started meeting on Teams, I then have the ability to take some of that external hardware. It's very akin to what some of that experience was traditionally when Teams was launched and they had the live meeting support. It's built into that webinar experience now and adds that enhanced capability. And the one thing to call out with the Teams Premium feature is introductory as Microsoft's rolling it out. It is a little bit discounted, but in GA, it's looking to be about $10 a user. So that's another component of the Copilot experience, the AI experience that lives outside of just that Microsoft 365 Copilot as well. And then there's Windows Copilot, which, as I mentioned at the beginning of the conversation, Microsoft's starting to roll out as part of 23H2, which is, it's going to take probably, from what I've read, probably the next month or so, I'm going to guess up until tonight to roll out to users. There is a guide that I put together at bit.ly/Windows 11 Copilot that walks you through that experience of how to enable the Windows Insider Preview and how to be able to actually install that capability. So you can take a look at Windows Copilot inside of the operating system as part of that update. There's a lot of new functionality. It is, think of it as Windows 11.1, as I've heard some people on the web refer to it as, with some of the new feature capabilities that are built into this particular build, but being able to use natural language speech to navigate and interact with different features in Windows, be able to generate AI-driven images, which are some of the capabilities you'll find in Microsoft 365 Copilot as well, will exist within that new build. It also being able to add things like the new File Explorer. There's enhanced OneDrive. There's a lot of capabilities that are coming as part of that new Windows build as well. The only caveat to call out is if you do have any users in the EU, there's a pause on that rollout as they look at some of the Digital Markers Act rollouts to be able to allow that to be implemented. And so Microsoft's working with the EU to ensure that they meet those guidelines within the new version of Windows 11. Security Copilot is one that is still currently in a private preview as well. This is leveraging tools like Sentinel. It's leveraging tools like Defender. It's using that AI to be able to take all that data and machine learning and look at security events within your environment and normal use within your environment and help you to be able to leverage that at machine learning speeds. And so to talk a little bit about that Security Copilot, it allows you to take instant response, usually within minutes, to any sort of security events. It allows you to use natural language prompts to go through and interact with some of the log analytics data that may live in a platform like Defender or a platform like Sentinel, and be able to dig deeper just based on not only the use of those tools within your environment, but also leveraging some of the Microsoft's Security Association's data as well, and being able to help your team. So you don't necessarily have to have someone that is completely trained and educated on things like log analytics, or Sentinel allows you to bring in analysts to be able to look at some of the data just by using natural language and be able to cut down tasks which may have originally taken hours to just a few minutes of time. And so that will allow you to not only modernize your security operations through a enhanced posture, but also allow you to streamline incident response, as well as being able to provide summaries to any sort of security events and being able to have some of those customized events. But the big thing is really that interaction, that chat-based ability to interact with your security data to be able to surface any sort of issues at a much more rapid pace. So from the perspective of availability around the Security Copilot, it's still in early access preview. You have to be an enterprise customer and work with the Microsoft team to be nominated to be able to use it. There is a fee for that 1-year license, There's still no information on what that's going to cost after it goes into GA at this current time. But some of the value is being able to help some of your security analysts and be able to have additional use cases based on what Microsoft is seeing within their customer base as well. So think of it as Sentinel, but then you're connected to security events, almost similar to what you would have in Defender. And to call out the prerequisite for that as well, that having that Defender license, that P2 license is required. So for some customers, it could be a E3 with Defender, or it could be an E5 license to get that P2 suite, but being able to have some of that additional analytic data that comes as part of P2 is what's required from a license perspective. So with all of the different AI tools, with Microsoft 365 Copilot coming into GA very soon, what are some things that you can do to be ready for that when it becomes available? If being able to add that AI-driven assistance for all of your users is a paramount and you want to add that soon, as it comes into GA, there are some things that you want to keep in mind to be able to prepare for that. So the E3 or E5 licenses, Azure Active Directory account for all of your users. They also have to have OneDrive provision because of how it interacts with some of that data. Being able to leverage all of your services within O365 is very important to get the richest data to be able to have that cross-app experience. We'll talk about that here in a few slides. Being able to have the new Outlook enabled for your users. The good news is it can use the new Teams or the classic Teams experience, depending on which your users are happy with. Loop, in some cases, there are certain components of the Microsoft 365 Copilot that leverages Loop for some of the summaries. So that needs to be enabled. Your devices must be on the current channel or the monthly enterprise channel. And then meeting the requirements for the Tenant Review Council. And you might be asking yourself, what the heck is that? And I actually asked that same question too. But in order to qualify to use Copilot, Microsoft wants to make sure that you are set up for success within your tenant and how it's configured. And to be able to meet those requirements, we'll talk through those for the Tenant Readiness Council. So as of November 1st is when your enterprise customers are eligible to be able to get Microsoft 365 Copilot. I mentioned licensing on the previous slide. The thing is with Copilot, it's a one-to-one. So if your users have an E3 or E5, you have to have the same number of those in order to get the Copilot license. You cannot purchase it outside of your licensing provider, or you can't purchase through your licensing provider, I should say. You can't go to a CDW or a Software One and purchase it right over the shelf. What they have to do is you have to work with your Microsoft Enterprise team in order to essentially be nominated for that, and then they have to work alongside you and your enterprise team to be able to be eligible for that. As of right now, retail or CSP customers, at least through the end of 2023, are not eligible. And that goes to some of the requirements of having that 300 seat minimum. And the cost of that essentially is $30 per month. So that roughly comes in around $100K for a year for just the minimum number of seats for Copilot. As well, looking at data residency requirements, Copilot does interact really well with GDPR and the EU. So that's one thing that is taken into account. And then finally, Microsoft looks at your usage health and ensure that you have a healthy usage adoption. So there's quite a little bit of a checklist that wanted to make sure that was detailed to users, detailed to customers that they have to go through and meet in order to be eligible to use Copilot, as well as being able to meet some of the licensing requirements and the minimum number of seats as well. So ensuring a healthy tenant, Microsoft has an adoption score report within your Microsoft 365 portal. You can go in and take a look at it at any point. this is some of the information that Microsoft looks at to ensure that you have adequate usage. So as you can see here from the sample image, from an organization score 58, it's not going to necessarily keep a customer from being eligible for Copilot, but it's going to drive a lot of their success and seeing that they do use Teams a lot for their meetings. They're collaborating a lot within Teams and SharePoint. They have a broad adoption of mobile users. They're using the Microsoft 365 apps, great network connectivity. Their endpoints are in a healthy state. All of those are contributing factors to looking at your adoption score. And so Microsoft looks at this as well, just to ensure that you're on track. If that number was very low, that might be something that Tenant Readiness Council may come back and say, you might need to go back and look at better adoption within your tenant to ensure that when you do turn on these features and functionality, that they provide you the best benefits possible. The other thing, and I would say probably on the list of requirements as you start to look at readiness for Microsoft 365 Copilot, is your data, and looking at three core tenets. It's looking at your permissions. It's understanding what are you doing for data loss prevention? What are you doing for sensitivity labeling today? If you have E5, leveraging that in conjunction with automatic classification is going to give you the best results when it comes to looking at the privacy of your data. And then being able to leverage some of the reports that exist within the Microsoft portal today to be successful in adoption of not only best data standards, but also best adoption of Microsoft 365 Copilot itself. So a lot to think about when it comes to being ready for Microsoft 365 Copilot, not only from your tenant itself, but understanding some of the licensing and cost requirements definitely are things to keep in mind as we move into that November timeframe and it does become available. And then over and above, not only as we talk about AI and some of those interactions of your Microsoft 365 data with that OpenAI platform, but also abilities to interact with that Microsoft 365 data for some of the AI tools that live and being able to accelerate some of that development. This kind of takes that line between the commodity tools that we just talked about and really cross them into those mission-centric capabilities and understanding what's available to help really speed up some of that adoption, to help your developers, help your teams, and be able to build intelligent apps within your organization. So the Microsoft AI journey, it actually has been going on since 2017. You heard Brian Hayden in here earlier today saying that he's been doing AI projects for a long time, and he's right. A lot of these capabilities have lived within the Microsoft platform for some time, and they've just continued to mature up into 2022 and 2023 as that ChatGPT has hit the stage. Microsoft recognized as they were going through, and even back in 2017, and defining their 6 core tenets around responsible AI, has really been building up to this point, this penultimate moment where OpenAI really is ready for the main stage across all of the Microsoft tools that exist today. And as we continue to adopt AI, one of the biggest adopters that Microsoft sees in the success in this era is that ability of no coding. It's being able to take some of the tools that exist within things like the Power Platform and being able to have them be widely adopted within your user base to where users with no technical background can adopt some of these AI tools. They can do it quickly, they can do it cost effectively because they don't have to have coding backgrounds. Then there's not a need to be able to or a need to have to actually hire developers. And so that reduces the overall cost of not only building some of these community-driven or employee-driven applications, but also being able to maintain them going forward as well. The other component as well for being able to really drive no coding is just that and the ability to be extensible with all the other Microsoft products. So being able to tap into things like a Microsoft 365 Copilot, read data out of Teams, out of SharePoint, etc., will be able to help provide some of that value and extend that application into some of the real world data that lives within your organization, and be able to be scalable and secure. Understanding Microsoft's frameworks and their security standards will ensure that that data is protected. So that era of no coding is really going to drive a lot of what we see in that AI boom over the next few years. And being able to leverage things like Power Platform to really easily build out things like workflows. So a user with no coding experience can build out a workflow that looks at an email when it arrives and then determine what happens with that email. What does it do? What kind of workflow does it go through? Pulls information, gets manager data, sends out an email, and looking for keywords like invoices, and then be able to start a specific workflow to approve or reject a message. All this happens by your end users. No one in IT or development has to drive this level of adoption, because leveraging a tool like Copilot inside a Power Platform will allow them to easily build these types of business automation processes with the tools that exist at their disposal without having some of that former knowledge of how those workflows exist. For the developers, the ability to leverage GitHub Copilot, which is now GA inside of tools like GitHub, inside of Visual Studio, will also allow some of those in-house or business tools that have been developed to be developed or be able to be matured a lot quicker, and allow your developers to write code a lot easier based on some of the languages, not only that they understand inside of the code that they've written, but also be able to help them save time and being able to complete code, troubleshoot code, etc., and being able to respond to it using natural language commands. So as you can see at the bottom, there's a lot of value behind that new version of Copilot that is integrated into GitHub to be able to use tools like the OpenAI standards and use natural languages to be able to solve problems within codes, or even be able to understand code. So in this scenario, the user is looking at specific details within a code itself. Maybe they need to call that specific code within their coding itself, understand how to use it step by step, and to be able to fix an issue within code itself. The GitHub Copilot will enable and speed up some of the troubleshooting processes, as well as some of the development processes as well. And then finally, being able to look at not necessarily Microsoft Copilot, but really that Copilot chat. This is where you take the different integrations from different applications that live outside of Microsoft 365's world and be able to integrate your development into these different available tools using plugins to really speed up the interaction of your users with the data that lives within your business. So as Nathan referred early on, being able to look at some of those three different vectors of how to interact with your data, whether it's things like a Bing Chat Enterprise to look at large language models, being able to look at Office 365 and Microsoft 365 Copilot to understand the data within your environment. This takes a step further into your business applications and allow them to really integrate chat capabilities that reach inside of your business as well. So probably ask yourself, where do I start? We talked a lot about OpenAI today. We talked a lot about the different types of copilots. There is multiple ways to look at these tools, and based off of where each of you in your organizations and their maturity might understand where to plug in some of these technologies. Over the years, Concurrency, we've kind of used this model of a technology maturity curve to really look at where our users are within their maturation process, and being able to understand kind of where you are on that journey, and keep in mind things like the innovation that doesn't necessarily have to happen at the top of the curve. Some of that can happen early on, but as users or as your organizations are starting to crawl, walk, run when it comes to AI itself, these are where some of those pieces of the journey can start to fit in. So, if you're still within Office 365 today, maybe that next step is looking at the M365 E3 platform. Maybe it's leveraging those large language models through Bing Chat Enterprises to search broad, and maybe it's using more of a narrow search with Azure Chat GPT to look inside your organization. It's looking at what are you running for Windows to be ready for Copilot, and that integration not only on the desktop, but also maybe leveraging tools like Teams Premium to help your users be more efficient when it comes to the meetings they're in every day. And then as you take that step up, it's looking at that Microsoft 365 Copilot or that security Copilot to enhance productivity, to enhance security. It's continuing to innovate through not only the code-based platforms, but then really starting to leverage some of the no-code platforms as well. That's all I've got. Any questions? We can start over again. Go ahead.
The cost of that is increasing my Microsoft cost by 25%. Is there going to be an opportunity to evaluate with a limited time to see if my organization is going to find value in absorbing that additional cost?
At this moment, the short answer is no. And I think as Microsoft is continuing to ideate through some of the business cases that they see with Copilot and business readiness, as they look to move into the retail and the CSP channels to be able to consume that on a smaller scale and maybe even a month-to-month scale, there's going to probably be some opportunity. But without looking at the crystal ball and where I stand right now in October 2023, Microsoft doesn't seem to, from at least a retail perspective or a GA perspective, I should say, going down that approach.
I can posit one observational reason why that's the case. When you turn on Semantic Index or Copilot, remember what it's doing is burning a whole lot of GPUs in a Microsoft data center to be able to create a large language model on the data that you have in SharePoint and M365. And that's what segments it from, say, a Generac GPT, which is a little more narrowly focused. Copilot is building that sort of brain against your entire data set, and it's going to do a lot of things really well. It's not going to do a lot of things very precisely, but it will do a lot of things really well. But that takes hardware and compute that someone needs to pay for. So that's why you can't turn on 5 people, because it wouldn't be economically reasonable to turn on for 5 people. It has to be some level bar where it actually makes sense to run that against your environment.
Great question. Yes, sir.
Is the Teams Premium different than the Office 365? Is it a subset?
It is an additional license. So if you have Microsoft 365 E3s or E5 today, it is a bolt-on license. Kind of like Microsoft also has bolt-on licenses for Intune now to add additional features and some of the other products that they have. Maybe they'll add on another SKU at some point to bundle all those together. Only time will tell, but they're definitely branched out into some of these additional add-ons on top of your existing licensing.
Can you back up the slide once on that maturity curve real quick? I think it's important to note on this curve that, it's not entirely intuitive because it is a curve, right? But these things are somewhat can happen kind of out of order in a sense, that the things up in the innovation space are not really dependent upon the things happening lower down in the spectrum. So just be aware that it's not entirely a step curve, but a lot of times there's things are more accessible than others. Doing a like company specific GPT is different, or like, or E3, E5 is a little bit more attainable than say like M365 Copilot because of the steps that you need to do to get there. But they all kind of work together at different points of this journey, and they're all going to be valuable for you.
And especially considering that a lot of these up here have been available since early 2023.
Yeah.
And a lot of the ones down here are coming out closer to Ignite. If we were to take a step forward into 2024 and have the same conference, I think this would probably make a lot more sense just because of the availability of a lot of these features and how easy it is to get into some of these in the future with a very low or no cost just based on existing licensing that you may have versus the whole ideation process that really does live around these last three. In terms of being ready from a business perspective, that's where I think that you start to see that curve really start to go upwards because of the business readiness that you will need in order to be successful in implementing those.
And the bottom half is more like generally driven by the commodity enhancement, and the top half is more use case driven by specific sort of value scenarios.
Did you have your hand up as well?
I did. It was basically the same question. I was just,
Okay.
what is it going to take an individual user to get that Teams premium access?
Yeah, so that is, let's see if we can go back here for a second. So that one would be, and there's definitely a lot of value even as we're using it here at Concurrency, and we've started to see some of that be realized as well through, I guess this is
I have to restart the share or something.
there we go. I'll just back up. How about that? Hang in there. We're going for a ride. Go back here to the.
Okay, while he's doing that, before everybody leaves, I want to ask one thing of you. We want feedback, and we also want you to win a raffle. So there's an incentive on this. So if you still have your agenda, there's a QR code on it. I'd really appreciate it if all of you would please click on that and fill out feedback. Tell us what you liked. Tell us a suggestion that would make this more awesome. Tell us what made us awesome or why you hated it. Hopefully things that are positive. If not, we'd love to take feedback too. Give us all that because we're on a roadshow. We keep making this better every single time. We're going to cover 2 more cities. We're probably have more cities after that. So we want to take all your feedback into this. So please kind of do us that favor. And if you want to talk after this, we'll be hanging around as well. And we'll love to work with each of you.
And if anyone needs one, I think you have extras, Amy.
Yeah, just
If anyone needs one, please raise your hand and we can get one in your hand. Remember to add that on the last slide, the next stop.
Yeah, we should just put it up there. I don't know what we're thinking. Yeah, put the QR code on the slide.
Yes.
Be digital. Talk about that.
But yes, the meeting recaps, and some of the other functionality in the Teams Premium, that is an additional license, as I was mentioning. You have to bolt that on, and it is a little bit cheaper right now. I think Microsoft's using that just as an incentive to get people into the feature. And as I mentioned as well, the meeting recordings and transcription is an important piece of it too. So, as you're interacting with members of your team or outside customers, that's just that caveat to remind them and say, we're using this to help with being able to provide better meeting recaps and efficiency. Are you okay if we turn this on at the beginning of a meeting versus a customer or someone else walking in and seeing that it's automatically turned on? So that in itself is something to keep in mind as a script to deliver to anyone that joins a meeting as to why that is happening. How many people automatically, if I could see us just show of hands just for my own curiosity, how many have transcription turned on for meetings today generally? Okay, so it's still pretty low. And anyone want to share why that's for the ones that didn't raise their hands, you might not leverage that today, the transcription?
One of the big things that our attorneys have decided.
Say no more.
There are states that require both parties to be willing to be in on recording, and it's one of the reasons, like, in our Zoom phone calls, we haven't turned it on as well, because if you get into a call with somebody that's in a state that has to have both parties know, you can get into legal troubles with it. If you don't tell everybody that you get on the phone with, hey, this call is being recorded.
Sure.
Even if you're calling them.
Because they could sign off on it, but does their company sign off on it inside of their states? And I could see the legal quandary there. So thanks for that feedback. The legal part was definitely the biggest. Yes, sir.
Not to transcription, but a question. Have you come across any sort of an issue where only one person is licensed with premium, but if they're not the meeting owner, they don't get the recap afterwards, even if they recorded it?
So unless everyone is licensed, they don't get the recap. To be quite honest, I haven't ventured down that yet, but I will definitely keep that in mind. As we're starting to turn it on for a lot of our delivery team, not only our delivery people within Modern Work, but also our project managers. That's something that we're just kicking the tires to kind of see what his capabilities are. I know that Microsoft, in some of the Teams channels that I'm on in the Microsoft tenant from concurrency, if I try to go in and meet and recap, it says it doesn't share it with outside organizations. So my guess is at some point in the future, that will be something that if you were to allow external organizations that are licensed to see it, it has to be a sharing option that's turned on. So both sides can actually see the recap, but that's a good note. We'll keep an eye on that. But to answer your question, I haven't seen it yet.
Okay, my experience was that even internally, that if the other people on the call, like say they owned it, it was only the meeting owner, if they were licensed for Teams Premium and started recording the transcription, that would actually do the recap.
The meeting owner.
Yeah.
Okay, that does, I could see that making sense. So someone started a meeting or it was their meeting and you had it set, they started to record and they weren't licensed, that it wouldn't capture that. I have gone back in some meetings that were recorded and transcribed before it was turned on and didn't see any of that recap on there. So I'm thinking that probably plays into some sort of additional tick in the Microsoft side that will generate that recap, making sure they're licensed and they are the meeting owner. Great question. Thank you. Yes, sir.
Is there a big list of prerequisites for Bing Chat Enterprise, or is that?
No, actually, that one's probably one of the easiest ones. So it really, the only prereq is E3, E5, Business Standard, or Business Premium. So as long as you have one of those licenses, you can go on in the tenant. And I found in some of the tenants that have access, even some of the demo ones, that as long as those licenses exist, that was already being turned on. So I'm guessing that might be a problem at some point. But at least the good news is, even if it's on and it's inside of your tenant, your user logs in with their identity, it's going to protect that search. It's not going to go out to the large language models. So
That's enabled at the tenant level?
that's enabled at the tenant level. So you have to go to this link and you have to be a global admin to check it out. Or in some cases, I have seen it already on.
The main thing to be aware of there is
Turn off ECE.
the main thing to be aware of there is that you can't surface your company specific data through the chat room. You can't surface company specific data.
I can't search for data that's in my SharePoint or Teams through this.
So
I can only look at
Putting
the,
it in keeps it safe, but I just can't get it back.
Yeah, it's like it doesn't. It's great. It just doesn't like serve any of those like. Okay, I want to start surfacing like this and this and this and this and this through a chat. Which is the main reason, like one of the main reasons that like companies take that next step of like provisioning their own. This is great for like just safety on things.
like I could search for
Yeah, very easy.
I could search for the ROI for migration to Azure Cloud, but I couldn't go here and search what was this customer project's ROI on that. I wouldn't be able to return that
Right.
information.
Can feed it that information in the question. But it can't use any of that.
It doesn't index it.
Yeah.
That's why you pay $30 a month per user for Copilot.
Right. And only the people that have Microsoft 365. This you got 15 people in your 300 person organization. It's only that group that's going to have access to that, or does everybody have to be?
I think as long as you have a license, user license with that, you can turn on that feature.
Is there a cost for that per user?
Yeah, it's $5 a user a month.
Yeah.
If you go to the GitHub one,
Sure.
anybody using GitHub X yet? No, that is some really interesting stuff. Yes, Brian, if you have dev teams and they are not using Copilot or Copilot X, this is another easy win. Like it's not particularly expensive to enable. It's it provides, especially once you get to X, it provides a tremendous amount of value to the productivity experience, and it augments the especially learning a new capability, understanding code base, learning language. Like it's a great little extra benefit. And this is a little older. The older is probably the wrong word. Like Copilot's older, X is not. But it's just X just dropped like for everybody yesterday. I think was yesterday, the day before, something like that. Very recently.
Yeah, it's GitHub Copilot. It's been around, but
X was rolled out at Build. Was when they made it available and you had to sign up for a wait list to get on it. But yeah, so it's
a program.
If you have a chat,
yeah. What's that?
if you have the chat, you're using X, is that true?
Well,
So
this is like Visual Studio Copilot, like inside of like your IDE for developers.
yeah, I mean, I'm using
Yeah.
Copilot and VS Code for sure. And I
Yeah.
have the chat interface. I'm not sure if I'm using GitHub Copilot or Copilot X.
You have the chat interface, but you can kind of like really interact with it. That comes with X.
There's the autocomplete features that is just Copilot, but then the
Copilot
X
is
is
just
chat.
the like autocomplete, so kind of like the dev tools that just do that. I gotcha.
Being able to select portions of code, right click on it, and then being able to query. That's the X experience.
Super productivity increase for developers.
But yeah, the GitHub Copilot, you just highlighting some code, right clicking on it, and then having it come back with
So, yeah, for sure.
natural language response.
Very. Yeah, basically.
How much of a productivity increase you would say moving to something like this is for you?
I mean, it really depends on the level of the developer,
Bill.
and their commitment to use it. But I mean, people that are using it on a regular basis just can't live without it at this point. I mean, it writes so much boilerplate code that it's unbelievable. 50% productivity increase. I mean, it's